I have been away for a few months. My name is Deacon David Viscount. I apologize. We left here in the middle of May. Had no idea that it would be more than 2 months before our return, but situation prevented us from being here any earlier. I'm wondering, have you ever made a promise that you did not keep? Have you ever made a promise that you did not keep? And if you have young children, if you're anything like my wife and I, when our kids were little, we said anything to get them to bed. So we promised a whole lot of things trying to get them to bed. Like, yes, you can have ice cream for breakfast as long as you get to bed like right now. Stuff like that. So have you ever made a promise that you did not keep? The reason I ask you that question is because I am about to break a promise that I promised to myself months ago that I'm not going to keep. I promised on my first weekend back to the parish I would not talk about the Camino de Santiago. And guess what I'm about to do? I'm about to talk about the Camino de Santiago. Now, if you're not familiar with the Camino, it's called the Camino for short. That's okay. Martin Sheen had a movie a couple of years ago called The Way, and it was all about the Camino de Santiago. It's an 800-kilometer trek from the south of France all the way across northern Spain, and it finishes in Santiago, which Santiago is St. James. It's where the remains of the apostle James, one of the sons of thunder, are, as far as we can tell. It is believed to be where the remains of St. James is, Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Compostela means the field of stars, Santiago de Compostela. So my son Patrick and I walked this 800-kilometer trek in late May and then through June. I promised that I wasn't going to talk about it. It's sometimes like a kid with a new toy. You know, the kid is so fixated on the toy. I didn't want that. But when I spent time with the readings for this weekend, I just thought that they matched up too perfectly for me not to talk about the Camino de Santiago. So over the past 3 Sundays, we've been hearing from the 13th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Father Robert, a couple of weeks ago, spoke about the parable of the sower and how, as the sower sows, some of the seed falls on the path, and some of it falls on shallow soil, and some of it in the thorns, and while some of it also follows on good soil. And Father James last weekend talked about the parable of the sower and how he sows during the day, but at night, the evil one, the enemy, comes and sows weeds, and how the weeds and the wheat mix together. So the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13, is known as the Parables Discourse, because throughout the entire chapter, Jesus talks to the people, and he teaches through parable after parable after parable after parable. And so the 13th chapter of Matthew concludes today when we hear the parable about the person who finds the treasure in the field and the merchant who finds the pearl of great price. Jesus makes a promise to us through these parables, and particularly today, because he says, the kingdom of heaven is like. And then he goes on to describe what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who, it's a treasure hidden in a field, which someone finds and then hides. And then in his joy goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. And he says the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of a fine pearl, and on finding the one of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. The kingdom of heaven is like, Jesus says. When Patrick and I began our 800-kilometer walk, I made a promise to myself as well that I would not quit. 800 kilometers is, I think you'd agree, a fair amount of walking. It's a long way. But, people ask you, before we left, they would ask you, are you going to walk the Camino? And I said, I hope so. That was my answer, I hope so. Because if you pick up an injury 200 kilometers in, your Camino is over. So I wasn't sure, but I made a promise to myself that I would do my best not to quit. The simplicity of the Camino is what draws people to it. Just walk. That's all you have to do. Walk. Each and every town that you walk through has a decent bed to sleep in, a decent meal to eat, and a decent shower most of the time. We've had a few cold showers, but that's really all you need. Just walk. And you meet many people from all walks of life, old, young, physically fit, some not. The reasons for walking varies. Ours was religious. Walking, the opportunity to walk and follow in the footsteps of the Apostle St. James. Some walk for spiritual reasons, and there is a difference, religious and spiritual. Some walk for health reasons, because they're told by their doctor, get out and walk. While others just walk for the simple personal challenge of being able to walk that far. As simple and as basic as a pilgrimage is, like the Camino, it gives you an awful lot of time to think about things. You have an awful lot of time. You walk for more than a month. And all of that time you're just simply left with your thoughts. So you think about family, and you think about work, and you think about life, and you think about the world, and you think about the promise in which Jesus offers us today about what the kingdom of heaven is like. And Patrick and I had 6 weeks of walking together, which was very special. The opportunity for me particularly, to have his undivided attention day after day after day for 5 to 6 hours, sometimes 10 hours a day, was wonderful. Now, Patty, my wife, and our daughter Jenna joined us for the last 320 kilometers, and we all walked into Santiago together. This was precious family time together. Here's one of the other reasons, other than the opportunity to think about the promise of Jesus in which he makes us this morning in our gospel. The opportunity to Spain. I don't know if you've ever been to Spain. I've been to very few European countries, but here's what I experienced in Spain. I experienced the awesomeness and beauty and wonder and majesty of the glory of God. Because as you walk from sometimes small little towns to relatively cities that are much smaller than Halifax, sometimes a third of the size, and you see cathedrals that glorify the majesty of God, it is bewildering to see what people have done and created, all for the glory of God. Beautiful little churches. Sometimes you would walk into a church twice the size in a little town that might have 100 people living in it, but with a beautiful altar. Just the respect and the glory which they offer to God is absolutely mind-boggling. So as you walk in and out of all of these churches and cathedrals, you see the awesomeness of God. You see what the kingdom of heaven, even if it's just a glimpse of what the kingdom of heaven is like. And when our son, 21-year-old, we were in Burgos, the Cathedral of Burgos. I don't know if you've ever been there, but if you haven't and you can get there, please go. Leon is amazing, Astorga is amazing. But it was in Burgos, we were in Pamplona, beautiful cathedral. Burgos. There are so many side chapels in the Burgos Cathedral. And as Patrick and I walked in and out of each of these cathedrals, or each of these chapels, he would look up, and I just happened to snap this picture. He says, wow. Wow. And then we'd leave that cathedral, we'd go, or leave that chapel and go into the next chapel, and he'd say, wow. Like if you can get a 20-year-old kid to say wow in a cathedral and know that it's the majesty of God, that to me is the promise of Jesus and what he makes to us today about what the kingdom of heaven is like. And he said wow so many times. He in fact we were in the 5th or 6th chapel. He says, okay, Dad, that was wow. That was really wow, but this is over the top. This is amazing. And I was just so happy that he and I could share that together. I want to offer a couple of other things just with the reading today and with the gospel about how our two people who found a treasure hidden in a field and the person who found the pearl of great price and how they responded to their discoveries. I offer you 5 observations about how they responded. Number 1, that it was personal. Their response to their discoveries was personal. Their discovery was meaningful to them personally. The person who discovers the treasure recognized its value. The person who bought the pearl of great price recognized its value. He sought it out. He knew what he was looking for. They could identify the fact that it was very precious. So much so that they took everything they owned, everything they had, and sold it and bought that one thing. You appreciate how big a pearl is, right? They sold everything else to have this one pearl. Number 2, it was urgent. Both of them acted immediately on finding what they were looking for. Once he found the treasure hidden in the field, he ran off and sold everything he had. Same with the pearl and the merchant. They knew what they had. They recognized the opportunity. Not only was it urgent, but it was time sensitive. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that they could not let go. They reacted without delay and without regret. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a one-time shot. Number 4, it was final. There is no maybe with our faith. There is no maybe with the kingdom of heaven. In the reading at the end of our gospel, Jesus says, do you understand all this? The kingdom of heaven, at the end of the age, all of the fish will be gathered. The good will go this way, the bad will go that way. It is final. That is it. There's nobody left. You either went left or you went right. And finally, it is sacrificial. The person who bought the field, the merchant who bought the pearl, sold absolutely everything they owned to obtain their new discovery. Jesus says that in his joy, he goes and sells all that he had to buy that field. He gave up every other possession except that one thing. That response was sacrificial, but he did it with great joy because he knew the value and what he had was the most precious thing in the world. Their understanding and response to the treasure and the pearl was personal. It was urgent, it was time-sensitive, final, and it was sacrificial. And so, too, it should be with our faith. Through the parables of the last 3 weeks, Jesus tells us that the kingdom of heaven is worth more than everything we have, everything we own, everything we are. The kingdom of heaven is priceless. So I'm going to piggyback on what Father James's homily was, or homework was for last weekend. For his homework, if you recall, he asked you to read that particular part of chapter 13 of Matthew's Gospel. So I'm going to piggyback on that, and this is good news for two reasons. One reason is if you didn't actually do Father James's homework, I'm going to include it in my homework this weekend. And number two is if you didn't do it, then you're going to cover it off. And if you did do it, you killed two birds with one stone. So what I'm going to ask you to do is read Matthew 13, the Gospel of Matthew. You will basically read the last 3 Sundays. You'll read the Gospel that Father Robert preached on, what Father James preached on last weekend, and this weekend's homily. And take time in prayer, as we did when we walked the Camino, to reflect what Jesus' promise of the kingdom of God and what it will be like. Contemplate that promise of Jesus. We walked 34 days during the Camino de Santiago, and we contemplated the promise of Jesus and what the kingdom of heaven would be like.